I'm Patty Moore, and I too had a nice long commute to come in for today. I left Los Angeles at 8 p.m. Monday and arrived here at 4 o'clock yesterday. And because there is a doctor in front of my name, the purser came and got me out of my very comfortable seat in the middle of a replay of Downton Abbey, just as Maggie Smith was making note of the fact that she longed for the day when people didn't think. And I thought, that's a great line. I have to remember that one. So there you have it. I remembered it. It's 43 degrees in Phoenix right now, which means I spent a lot of time in my pool. And I also hallucinate quite a bit. So I think I heard the other evening as I was doing laps, a report on BBC News that there's been a recent opera that stages a rape and that the audience booed. So I wasn't hallucinating, that actually happened. Yeah, I also heard the artistic director trying to explain why that was a reasonable thing to put in an opera, and I give him a lot of luck for his job. It's interesting, isn't it, how we respond in the course of everyday living, how we react based on our experiences, how we assume based on what we think we know, and maybe what we've learned incorrectly. As a little girl, I was raised to be mindful of the needs of others. I remember quite clearly being trained that as I rode the bus with my mother and sisters, if someone boarded who was older or using a stick, I was to jump from my seat and offer it immediately, which I did. When I go into the tube today, and not tomorrow, I have to remember that, it will be the rare moment where a younger person will rise and say, "Please, madam, take this seat." And I have to wonder, like Maggie Smith did, wouldn't it be nice? But wouldn't it be nice if people thought? I think it's quite sad, as I speak being a baby boomer, that the children we raise, the millennials, have an apparent lack of responsibility for others in their lives. But from the state's perspective, I offer to you, the reason is something called T-ball. T-ball is an insipid game that every little child is meant to play, boys and girls alike, where at a tender age of 2 or 3 years, they're put in a proper uniform. They're made to stand in front of a stake that holds a big plastic ball. And like in cricket, they take a bat and they swing at it. And when they miss, everyone jumps to their feet, applauds loudly, and says, "Well done, you!" And they're given a trophy. The next kid up takes a swing, sends it sailing a mile in the air, and gets the same applause and the same trophy. And so we wonder aloud, what's wrong with this generation? What's wrong indeed? So this sense of sympathy, this sense of applied sympathy, empathy, where is it? How do we define it? How do we grow it? How do we know it? There's a lot of adverts in the States now showing men in the roles typically found to be those of women. It's caused an interesting debate. Gets lots of giggles, but it's caused also a good conversation. One of my favorites just came out. It shows a little child, a girl, on a school bus. The bus has emptied. She's sitting alone crying. Her feelings have been hurt. Someone has been cruel to her, as sadly children often are. And then you realize there's one other child on the bus, a little boy, who steps up, looks at her kindly, and says, "You know, most people think boys are loud and uncaring, but that's not true." And he hands her a tissue. And she accepts it and wipes her tears and says, "Thank you." And the little boy proudly steps back allowing her to get out of the seat, and then, as a gentleman had been trained, she walks forward and he protects her from the rear. And you find yourself smiling and crying all at once, because it's an era gone by. This little boy, obviously, trained, raised quite correctly, quite properly. Is it pure accident? Does he have old-fashioned parents? Or is it the nature of the beast? Are we really at our best when we're caring for and about others, especially when they're at a point of greatest need? How do we train for that? How do we teach that? When President Obama took office, he made a speech within the first week of his presidency, and he talked about the need for empathy, and he was resoundingly booed by the Republican Party, those wackadoodles who would say no to anything said by a Democratic president, and further enhancing the disparity and the divisiveness that we have in the states, hardly united, more like 50 separate countries, all at each other's throats. And sadly, President Obama backed away from the use of the word empathy. He was stunned, he was startled, he had no idea what he had said wrong, but he gave it up. Much like President Clinton did several years before him, when he, in his first week of office, called for a design summit, so that by design we could analyze where should the United States go? What should the United States be? Imagine, by design. And again, the Republican says, we don't need no stinking design, and we don't need no stinking empathy. What a world. I remember the first time I received a text from my nephew, and it said LOL, and I thought, wasn't that sweet? Lots of love. When I saw him next, he said, no, Auntie, laughing out loud. No, it means lots of love, and I've disowned you. So the emergence of language and how we utilize language and how we think deliberately with our language has clearly come into this mix and the debate of empathy in our lives. I have two nieces. One was raised at home by my sister, who then, after the birth of her second child, had to quickly return to work, only after 4 weeks, having delivered her younger daughter. And this child was sent to a daycare center. The difference in these two little girls quite clearly was day and night. The little one, who was with a large group of children, with maybe a couple of adults in charge, was the first one to bounce up from the table at night, clear the dishes away, tell everyone, no, I've got it, put the things in the sink, take care of the napkins. She tidied up, while her sister, the queen, sat at the table acting like it wasn't her job. My sister, who raised both girls, noticed the difference immediately, having done too much for her firstborn and having done quite little for her second. The child who was raised by the herd was far more sympathetic, empathetic, and responsible. Is that a lesson? Is it applicable across borders? I'm not sure. I studied and trained and worked with the designer Raymond Loewy. Mr. Loewy, if you Google him, if you don't know the name, is considered the father of American product design, industrial design. And one of the first projects we had as I came out of university was to go into the New York State prison system. And I was given a directive to wear no makeup, pull my hair back in a ponytail, and wear a quite bulky jumper and cover up any sense that I was female. And Mr. Loewy looked at this memo and laughed aloud. He said, do they really think men in a prison won't recognize a woman no matter how she looks? Evidently, they thought so. Needless to say, I wore my makeup, I wore my miniskirt, I wore my boots, I wore it all, and I was shown great deference, and I was never afraid. In talking about play today, I'm reminded of one of my professors at Columbia University when I was concluding my degree in psychology, who said to us, there's an acid test for people who are interested in marriage, particularly to men. If you find a man who's not willing to play with little children, run. Run to the hills, do not look back. And if you find a man who's willing to get down on the floor and take an imaginary phone call with a little child who hands him an imaginary phone, marry him. Marry him now, because that's the difference. Back to the adverts. Big, hulking, black American football player, sitting at a little tiny table and chairs with his little baby princess, all in pink, and together they're having a tea party. And then you see in the background his friends walking in, staring at him like, what the hell is wrong with you? And the father, of course, responds, wait for me in the front room, we're having our tea. He's got his little girl outfit on and all the rest. He doesn't care because he loves his daughter. And in that moment, he's her tea party partner. We're also warned as we train in psychology, when you see somebody who laughs when someone's in pain, there's a problem. But then too, the laughter is always important, and especially, as we were saying earlier, in the face of great pain, because we have to have the balance. I'm reminded of the wonderful scene with Gregory Peck and Audrey Hepburn in Roman Holiday, when he teases her by putting his hand into the mouth of the stone lion, the truth detector, and pretends his hand's being munched away. And as he screams in agony, and Audrey Hepburn's character reacts to help him, trying to extract his arm, and then realizes it's all been a joke. Laughter. But first she hits him in the chest, maybe as she should. Or maybe Goldie Hawn's spoilt character of a very wealthy woman who, when she's thrown from her yacht and lands in the cold waters, is put into a state of amnesia and awakens a caregiver, a loving pseudo-mother for a family of 4 hellion little boys with Kurt Russell as her pretend husband, and she has no idea that this is none of it true. She's made to believe this is her life, and it's only later when she regains her memory that we realize that she's been changed empathically when she tries to serve a tray of food to her mother, who's astounded that her daughter would do the work of a servant. Maybe some change is good. I'm also reminded of the Folsom Prison recording of Johnny Cash, some of America's worst offenders in lockdown for the rest of their lives, and how music transformed him. And if you've never heard this album, you simply must. It's magical, how soothing, how healing is music. And we'll be hearing more about that shortly. Sorry for the flow of consciousness, but I was told to respond, so I'm doing what I can. Did that. It's interesting, the language piece again. We were talking about criminal justice, and I can tell you, as an American, we're quite tired of criminal justice. Now there's a lot of talk about victim justice. One of the best places to be a criminal is the United States. You can do just about anything and live very comfortably for the rest of your life, and a very long life at that. The Boston bomber has just requested a new trial after being found guilty and sentenced to death, and he will get it, and he will live another 10 years while those victims wait for some resolution. But is there really resolution in killing someone else? Someone whose brain has been so tragically rewired for hate. A couple of weeks ago, an innocent handful of people entered a historic church in South Carolina. A young man came in, asked if he could pray with them, and an hour later stood, announcing that they were the cause for all the trouble in the world because they were Black, and shot them one by one by one. President Obama went to yet another gun-related funeral and begged the American people to please give up the guns. It won't happen, but they're giving up the flag, the Confederate flag that was part of the Great War between the states, a war that so many Southerners seem to have forgotten existed because in the South, those citizens demanded to keep slaves, and in the North, President Lincoln said, "Oh no, you don't." And so thousands upon thousands died for the right to enslave others to do their bidding. A strange history we have in the States. So we have no more Confederate flag, but we have our guns. It's our right. And sadly, there will be people who will fight and die and die and die for that right. When I was 85, I slept many a night alone in a park, in the cold, where the only toilet was a bush. Whereas I nodded off, I felt something at my feet and saw that it was a rat nibbling at my shoelace. Where I went hungry, where I was shooed away from a restaurant when I was begging to please come in and use the loo. Where people wouldn't help me as I struggled to board a bus. When people were cruel and told me to hurry and get out of their way as I tried to cross the street. When I was 85, little children came up to me with a great big smile and held my hand and walked alongside me with their parents, okay. Because to them, anyone with snow on the rooftop was a Grammy and to be loved. But also those same aged children one day were tossing stones at me and laughing, making me into target practice just because I was slow and I was walking with a stick. And they didn't seem to care and they didn't seem to know better what had gone wrong at such an early age. When I was 85, I heard the sneakered feet running behind me, and then suddenly an arm around my neck and pain in the small of my back as I was kneed to the ground and kicked and punched to the sound of laughter of 7 young boys, no more than 12, hitting me, punching me, as I realized the warmth I was feeling was my blood. As I was lying on a sidewalk now, a victim of elder abuse, but I was 26. In the guise of elders, I was able to travel throughout the United States and Canada for nearly 4 years, and I learned quite quickly what it was to be this thing we call old. And I wondered daily, where was the empathy? Where was the love? Where was the understanding? Where was the courtesy, the sympathy? Where was the humanity? And so I applaud, Lorraine, everything you do here in this wonderful effort to embrace design, to embrace the empathic agenda of creating for all peoples the equality we all deserve and the quality of life we all desire. Thank you so much.